What's happening, everyone? My name's Devon from DEBO'S Fishing, and today we're talking about shallow bass versus bluegill. What kind of title is that? Where are we going? Well, I'm talking post-spawn fishing. So after most of the bass are done spawning, of course, the lake or pond that you're in, they go in kind of different intervals. It's not like every bass moves up and spawns and, they all move. They kind of go in intervals. But once you see most of those, bass starting to roam around again, that post-spawn kind of lull has started. After that, bass are going to be feeding up. Spawn is, very intense on them. They have to guard, they've done the egg laying, all that. They've got to eat and pack some weight on. And that is a perfect time to try and mimic bluegill, because after the bass spawn, all the bluegill are going to start moving up to their beds. They're going to start spawning. You'll see all those, walking around the shallows. You'll see those things that look like egg crates, all these little round divots. Those are going to be all those little bluegill beds. And you better bet your butt that the bass are going to be up there getting revenge from these bluegill pestering them and trying to eat their eggs while the bass were on beds. So I'm going to break this down into 4 tips that have really helped me post-spawn bass fishing target those bass that are up shallow eating bluegill. And the first tip is, it's actually a lure. Throw a bluegill style or color spinnerbait. This is a Nichols Pulsator, 1/2 ounce. It's got the orange, the chartreuse on it, that, kind of bluegill, green pumpkin lines on it. It's got the gold blades. That's key for me, especially in the lakes that I'm fishing. Once, post-spawn is getting here, a lot of the lakes are kind of dirtied up. And for me, a bluegill spinnerbait post-spawn kicks butt. Again, I want those gold blades to help mimic, the gold bluegill kind of flash color in that stained water, that bluegill profile up shallow. Try to get this as close as you can to wood, those grass lines that have started to come up. Anywhere you start to see, those bass pushing around bluegill beds, throw it up there, especially if there's a steep drop off by it. Those bass that have moved back off those beds, maybe to some of those points, are going to be looking to eat, and bluegill are one of those main delicacies. Now, a big key for me is vary up your speed and the depth that you're fishing this. I've fished this super shallow, dirt shallow, around wood and such, and had really good luck. However, there were a couple days within the past couple years I was out in my John boat throwing a spinnerbait out right off the edge of the drop-off. And when I say shallow bass fishing for all this, I'm talking like 6 feet or shallower, right? Right off the drop-off where I couldn't see my spinnerbait in the water anymore. It was just to where it was dark, and that's where I was getting every single bite on this bass, come up and kind of the depths come up and ambushing those bluegill on the sides of those little drop-off and points and such. So if you've never tried fishing a bluegill color spinnerbait, everybody says white or white and chartreuse for a spinnerbait, but post-spawn, this color will kick butt. Okay, the second tip I've got for you is don't just focus on moving baits. When I hear people saying, I'm going to mimic bluegill post-spawn, I feel like this is what they think of, right? A jointed swim bait, or this is a matte lure swim bait that I had to, redo. Throwing these on beds can certainly work. I'm not a huge bed fisher. I'm just not great at sitting there, doing it for a long time, but don't focus on just moving baits. Have some sort of follow-up bait ready. I can't tell you how many times my buddy Randy has kicked my butt throwing a jig that resembles a bluegill on beds around those shallows where he sees bass moving around that have already spawned out, and has kicked my butt on it. And throwing them on beds, if you have a bass on a bed, a bluegill jig like this is a great way to get those bass to bite. But I'm really focusing on post-spawn. This is still a great way to do it. Throw this around, flip this around some of those bass. But one big tip for this is be as quiet as you can. Post-spawn, sometimes you might even have to go to a stick bait like this. This is the Reaction Innovations, that green pumpkin with some purple flash to it. Being as stealthy as you can putting that in there, because the bass will be kind of spooky post-spawn. They can get in kind of that weird funk, but they will still definitely eat. They still need to put on weight. So you can flip one of these in front of it, 2-3 feet, and let it just barely shimmy down. Good chance you're going to get it. Like I said, throwing a jig, skipping this around overhangs, any spots where you think those bluegill might be that bass are eating them. This is the Missile Baits D-Bomb. This is the Super Bug color. I got a big pack of these, and just flipping around a Texas rig like this, man, there was a video, it's been years ago, I was filming how to do different casts, and there was bass busting post-spawn, busting on bluegill behind me super shallow, and I had a chatterbait and later a Texas rig, and was watching those bass wake up on those fish real shallow, just throwing one of these in there, a Texas rig. I had a large craw, and they were crushing it. So it doesn't have to be an exact bluegill profile. When those bass are in feeding mode and you see them up shallow hunting those bluegill, it can just be that outline, that color, that green pumpkin, maybe a little chartreuse, little orange to it to mimic, the belly of the bluegill. something like that, and you are going to get bites. Okay, tip number 3, and that was a perfect segue, talking about those bass actively feeding and pushing fish. Tip 3 is watch for active feeding windows. I might be out in a 6-hour day and that might be dead. And then the last hour, bass just start turning on. You see them up shallow, popping, hitting, pushing those bait. You see them waking and, bass up there in the shallows. That's how shallow they're getting, almost, beaching themselves up there, trying to get and push these shallow bluegill. So watch for those feeding windows. Oftentimes you can look at, if you have like Bass Forecast or one of those apps, it'll show like your min and max times for like the best kind of average bite. Don't always rely on that though. It might be an early morning feeding, or in your lake or area, it might be like always the last, that last hour before sun's going down. Watch your area and don't think that just because the sun's up high, everything's going to be done. Even post-spawn, when those bass are still really feeding, weed lines, overhang from trees, anywhere that's casting shade where those bass can sit and ambush, come back and out and eat those bluegill is a great spot to focus on. So look for those windows. Don't get discouraged, because I hear a lot of people, like, once it gets into like spawn and then post-spawn and summer fishing, they don't like fishing it. That's honestly my favorite time. You've got the slop coming up. You can even throw a frog up shallow to mimic some of these fish, bluegill up in their feeding. A number of different ways you can do it, but look for those feeding windows. And just because the sun's up doesn't mean quit. Oftentimes they're just going to be closer to cover. So when you're flipping that Texas rig in there, you're putting that frog under an overhang. Do it as stealthily as you can. Get it all the way up in there where everybody else isn't fishing, and be patient. Wait for those feeding windows, because I guarantee you there's going to be times when they absolutely turn on. All right, tip number 4 is get experience on your local lakes. You can watch, a ton of people do instructional type stuff. Me, Mikey Balls, Alex Wright, anybody, explaining their local lakes, but it's always going to boil down to the places that you fish. Fishing out in the West Coast, California is different than New York, which is different than Texas, which is different than here in Iowa. So what does that really mean? Well, look for the patterns on your local lakes. You might have a huge pond that's shaped like a fishbowl, and it's just got piles and, clumps of algae and grass. That's where a good spot for the fish to hide and ambush. You might have a lake that's full of wood. You don't ever get a crank rock and stuff. There's not a single piece of rock, but you've got all kinds of wood laydowns. Learn where those fish are in your areas. Learn the contours, the drop-offs. If you've got a topographical map, check that out. If you're a bank angler, you can just drag a jig or a Texas rig and see where are those drop-offs, where are those logs that I can't see with my eyes, but I can feel it. Those are great spots to remember and target, because when bass spawn, that post-spawn, they're moving to find bluegill. They spawn in a lot of the similar areas. Anywhere they can be comfortable. It might be 2, 3, 4 foot of water down next to a big log where they're safe in there. It could be up shallow in a couple feet of water. So learn the spots on your local lake. Get out and fish as much as you can. I know that sounds crazy, but how many times have you been getting ready to go out and think, I've only got like an hour or two, I'm not going to go. Anytime you got, go. Even if it's an hour, go fish. All right, folks, comment below and let me know, how have you been successful targeting bass up shallow post-spawn that are, oftentimes chasing and eating those bluegill. That doesn't mean that's all they're eating. They could still be eating shad. After bass spawn, some of them are going to move out deeper to that, 10-ish foot range. Find a deep dock or brush pile, rocks or whatever, and go out to some of those. But all the way through the summer, there's always going to be some shallow fish. They'll call them those local fish that always kind of live up shallow on your big lake. So don't get discouraged if you're a bank angler. Don't think that you need a fancy boat or a kayak or something to get out and fish deep. You can still always find fish up shallow. It might be a little bit more challenging, but you can always find them. So comment below and let me know, what is one thing that you've done to target those shallow bass in the summer that are up feeding on bluegill? Is it one of these? Swimbaits are super popular now. Do you throw one of these and you just catch the snot out of them? Maybe you already know about the bluegill chatterbait or spinnerbait, something like that, some sort of moving bait, swim jig. Is there a specific rig that you've used up shallow that's caught them? Comment below and let me know. I thank you all for watching. Again, my name is Devon from DEBO'S Fishing. I got to edit, so thanks for watching, and until next time.